Hello, we're going to go ahead and get started here. This is LASFS, the panel continues. And I have with me David Gerrold. Now, you probably know David Gerrold. Yes, we can applaud. David, thank you for being back here at LASFS. First question, how long has it been since you've been to LASFS? I know you do LASCON every year, but...
I think, let's see, Vince Doherty was in town for Mid-Americon 2. That was 2016, and we passed through a lot. So there's been at least 2 years and several months, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again for being here. You have written for many, many years through many different mediums. You've been in television, you have written novels. Go ahead and
comics, manga,
comics, yeah.
Stage play, film scripts, stuff, short stories, articles, columns.
Which do you prefer? What do you like writing best?
Whatever pays the most.
Okay.
Oh, did I say that out loud? I'm sorry. I love script writing, but it has to be in an environment where you know that your script is appreciated rather than, you put all your enthusiasm into a script and then somebody says, well, I don't know, maybe we could... I'm not going to go there because that would there certain producers would say things that you would just roll your eyes and just, I can't believe, is that what that can't be what this show is about.
I find it hard to believe that you could write a script and anyone would care about it. What are these mythical environments you're talking about?
No, actually, the original Trouble with Tribble script was a lot of fun to write because Gene L. Coon was very much in tune with what Star Trek had to be. Land of the Lost was a lot of fun to write because Sid and Marty Krofft were not micromanaging the scripts. Sliders was fun to write because I was working with Chris Black, who was a marvelous producer. Bill Dial was gone now. Joe Straczynski is a great producer to work for on The Real Ghostbusters and Babylon 5. Okay.
Yes.
I thought it was just me hearing bells. There are a few other producers who are actually a lot of fun to write for. But in general, I really enjoy the sense of freedom I get when I'm writing a novel or a story because that's purely me. Nobody else gets a vote. Well, the copy editors. And do you really want to use a comma here when you could have used a semicolon? Nah. In terms of creative control, the novel is the best.
Okay.
It's just hard work because you have to fight your way through every sentence. And you reread it and say, why did I put that sentence in? Or I can change that word. I mean, really, you get down to the smallest elementary particles of the language in a novel. You can't get away from that level of scrutiny, self-scrutiny. Yeah. The average reader, he doesn't care. He's just because he just wants the story. But the writer... most writers, I have this obsessive compulsive perfectionist streak. So it's like, and the book will be out of print in 3 years. Everybody will have forgotten it, and who cares? But I care, so.
Do you still have impulses to go back and tweak your finished novels, or at least there?
Yeah, I want to update the technology in The War Against the Tor before it gets reprinted, so.
Okay.
So, but the story, the relationships will remain the same.
Yeah. Have you uncovered some general themes or trends in your writing? I know it's primarily science fiction.
Love, loss, redemption.
Okay. Are those the most dramatic points you found? What drew you to love, loss, and redemption?
You live through it, and that becomes your life story. And writers have a singular story. This is not a rule of thumb that one size fits all. But if you read enough of any given writer, you start to get that person's theme. Like with Terry Pratchett, is evil is clumsy and will defeat itself. Good is clumsy and will win anyway. With Heinlein, it's always the man who knew better. It's always the competent, responsible man. And you start to notice certain themes in specific writers. There are some writers who you read their stories, you want to go out and kill yourself. They're depressing. Some writers like Harlan Ellison are always like a little bit of a drug trip, because even though the story is complete, you have been taken through some marvelous verbal scenery. And after a few decades, I learned that I have a story of, I like that Heinlein character who's going to take on big challenges, but he's going to pay a price, an emotional price for those challenges. And even though he wins, there's always a cost. So I'll leave it to anyone else to analyze my work.
Yeah. Have people analyzing your work kind of changed the way you write sometimes? Do you read feedback?
Oh, I will look at reviews and sometimes fan commentary, but it's not going to change. It's not going to change what I write. We did this as Katine and I did this marvelous story together called Bubble and Squeak, which was in the May-June Asimovs. I put it up on my Patreon page as a freebie, so anyone can read it, because it is eligible for award consideration. All right, there's the commercial. But I think it's a really good story. And two of the reviewers complained that there is a pun in the middle. And I'm not going to spoil it, but the pun, we established that these two heroes have a really good relationship, that they tell jokes with each other even as their lives are in danger. And so the joke at the end, which is a little bit of a pun, is part of who they are. And my feeling, and one reviewer said, well, in real life, people wouldn't be joking at such a time. And are you kidding me? Gallows humor is probably one of the most popular forms of joke telling. And so, I noted that a couple reviewers had objected to the joke, but I wasn't going to take it out. To me, the joke is a key part of that relationship, that you have spent so much time with these guys. You're entitled to that little piece of their intimacy, that they joke together. Yeah. Ray Bradbury said it best. You must learn to accept rejection and reject acceptance. I don't know how he said that without stumbling over the words, but that's what he said.
That is pretty fantastic, Larry. Do you feel pressure ever to write stories for readers? When you're coming up with new ideas, do you pay attention to what the audience trends are?
No.
That kind of thing? Well, that's encouraging to hear. I'm just curious.
No, I write for me. I let everybody else pay for the privilege of reading over my shoulder.
That's great.
I'm going to get in so much trouble for this. Writing is like masturbation. If you're not having a good time, no one is. And you don't have to respect yourself in the morning. You can wash your hands afterwards. But the important thing is that you're working for an audience of one, and you know when you're satisfied. And the only time I think people are ever masturbating for a wider audience is when they're doing porn, and they're getting paid for that. I'm not getting porn, but they're paid for porn. So never mind. That's just hope, right? Just let's drop. Yeah. But
that's great insight, though, to write for yourself.
I have to make me happy, or I tried once writing something purely commercial, purely crap. I got like 8 pages into it, and a little bit of brilliance was creeping in, and I thought, no, this is not going to work.
You can't add brilliance to the commercial.
You cannot take the brilliance out of it. Look, it works out like this. There's only one person on the planet who can write a Larry Niven story. That's Larry Niven. There's only one person on the planet who can write a David Gerrold story. So why would I try and write something that isn't me?
How long did it take to discover your uniquely David Gerrold self?
Wow, I don't know. I guess we stumble along with that adolescent identity crisis at least till we're 40, and by then it's too late, So I would guess.
You're stuck with you by then.
I would guess. Well, I had to learn some lessons about how to put the language together.
Yeah.
I just did a couple posts on Facebook about 2 of the places where I learned how to write. One was quantity. the more I typed, the more I would learn to recognize the sentences I shouldn't be typing because they were just cliched or bad or stupid or clumsy.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was I paid attention to what the good writers were doing. I looked at how's Harlan Ellison accomplished these effects. And James Blish said, who does it hurt? That's what your story's about. And I looked at how Heinlein created his unique voice. And Chip Delaney, how did he create such wonderful, magical, stories? And how did Ted Sturgeon make the language sing? And Ted taught me a thing called metric prose, which solved all problems about style, because after I played with it for a while, I realized there's no such thing as style. It's the voice of the story. Once you find the voice, it's like Peter Sellers would build a character first by creating the voice for it. And if you look at all the different characters Peter Sellers played, they have different voices. And so once I figured I have to find the right voice for each story, it started to crystallize. And part of that comes from a thing I learned when I was an art major, is we would study a different artist every week, and then we would paint in that artist's style that week. And so I started trying to do that as a writer. So what's a Harlan Ellison style? How do I evoke that sense? What's a Heinlein style? How do I evoke that sense? So obviously I wasn't imitating, but I was trying to evoke how does Jack Vance create such marvelous scenery with the same language that Heinlein uses, right? So, and how does Phil Dick take us inside a person's head that way? And so studying what each major author was doing and trying to figure out the voices that they were working with, it created a mindset of looking at the language differently. And then there's that thing the Beatles did, is the Beatles said they would never write the same song twice. And so I'm always looking, what's the challenge here? What have I never attempted before? What can I learn by taking on this challenge? So I've written some cyberpunk in the last couple of years just to see if I could do it. Mm-hmm. And one of those stories was published in Analog. My first sale to Analog. I wrote cyberpunk. It sold to Analog. That was called Endless City, and I'm not sure when it got published, this year or last year.
Okay, well, fantastic. I feel like a lot of people stumble along the way when they're copying or imitating, trying to find that voice, but you can clearly see other people's works. Like you were saying, Philip K. Dick, you can find that style and rhythm, but adapting it to your own perspective, that's something I don't know how you figure
I think it requires, we don't say it anymore because you get in trouble, but writing is a certain kind of insanity, and I don't feel like getting sent off to the funny farm, so I won't say that. But there is a specific obsessive compulsive disorder in writing, is that you have to be willing to sit alone in a room and talk to yourself for long periods of time. And then you have to be arrogant enough to think that what you're saying is worth typing. Mm-hmm. And even worse, you have to have enough hubris to think that someone will pay you for that. So you put it in the mail and send it off to an editor and say, hey, pay me for this story. And then they do, and you say, there, see, I'm a writer. Well, not mentioning any names, but so were some of the worst pulp writers of the 40s and 50s. So I don't want to be one of the worst pulp writers. I want people to read my work and come away saying that was worth the time I invested. I had a good time, or that moved me. Or 3 times in my life, I've gotten letters and saying, I read your story and it kept me from committing suicide. Janice Ian says she gets 3 of those a week, so I'm not happy about, But when you make a difference in someone's life, that is a successful moment.
That's fantastic. Switching gears a little bit, so many of us are curious about television and working in that medium. So what do you do when you're collaborating with a bunch of people?
That's when you have to have good social skills.
Okay.
And also, you have to be a bit of a bully and say, no, my way is better. I've never worked in a writer's room. I have been in a couple brainstorming sessions that were very useful because I just shut up and took notes because everybody else was coming up with great stuff. But for the most part, when I'm on a television assignment, it's here's the story, go write it. I mean, here's first bring the outline, do this in the outline instead of that. Okay, I can do that. And then you go home and you write a script and you bring it in and they say rearrange this a little or give us more of that. I did a script recently for a project I'm not talking about, and one of my partners said, we need more strong women. And I said, you're right. So we'll give this dialogue take this dialogue away from the dad and give it to the mom, and that makes her a much more interesting character anyway, and the dad still has his bit. And then we'll introduce this character. We'll give her, even though she doesn't show up this early in the series, if we give her a scene here, we establish her right there, and she's right there, and it's a good scene for her. And so, you get input. You get people saying, I need more of this, or could you do more of that, or, this is what we need to see. And generally, if it makes for a better script, yeah, I'm all in favor. Yeah, oh yeah, I can see that'll work. All right, I can do that. Occasionally, I have said, no, that's just not right for the story. Mm-hmm. And then I have to defend myself why. And sometimes they listen. There are producers who are absolutely marvelous to work for because they respect writers. Joe Straczynski is one of them. I don't think he is. I think he is moved on from producing things like Babylon 5. But when he was buying scripts from freelance writers, he was a great guy to work for because he respected what a writer could bring in, especially if he didn't have to do any rewriting. And when I was doing Land of the Lost, I hired the best science fiction writers I could get, like Larry Niven and Ben Bova and Norman Spinrad, because I knew I wouldn't have to do a lot of work rewriting.
Okay. How did you get in the position where you were able to bring on so many authors in Land of the Lost?
That was Sid and Marty Croft, and Marty said, go do the show.
Oh, that's awesome.
and I said, no problem. And for about 20 minutes, I thought I could probably write all these myself. And then I thought, no, I'm going to have some fun. And I got on the phone to various people mm-hmm. and said, come write a script for me. And Dorothy Fontana and Walter Koenig, Margaret Arman, and then Dick Morgan, who had written for Space Patrol, which was a show I'd grown up with. He came in, he did such a marvelous job, we gave him 2 more script assignments the first season because he was just doing so well. And he ended up taking the job for second season. So.
How important is it networking with other authors? I feel like that is one thing that everyone likes to do. I
hate the word networking.
Okay. Why do you hate the word networking?
Because it's jargon. I mm-hmm. like hanging out with other writers. It's like David Brin. I'll sit and talk with David Brin. He's full of marvelous ideas and research and science. He gets his facts right, and he has a unique insight. So I come away with my head buzzing. Mm-hmm. Harry Turtledove, he knows history. He says, well, I heard this, and there's a story there, but, and Harry knows his history. So he will correct you where you get things wrong, or he will say, that's not possible because of this and that and the other. Mm-hmm. So in terms of being able to talk to other writers, other writers are the only people who understand that entire process of getting something from here to the keyboard. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it's like they're the only other people on the planet who understand what it is to do that. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to someone who says, well, I let you write your little stories. Excuse me, this relationship is over.
Oh, that's great. Well, I was curious, what is it about science fiction that you love, that you spent your career working in?
Well, science fiction is the only literature that is not about the past. It is about the future. It is about possibility. It is about the way things are. It's not the way they have to be. Science fiction is about ideas and possibilities, and it's subversive. It says the status quo is the enemy. It is not something that we have to accept. And so anybody who grew up reading science fiction is going to be a little bit unhappy with the world the way it is, and if you come to science fiction already unhappy with the way the world is, science fiction says we can do better. We can do different. And as a science fiction writer, we get to go anywhere in space, anywhere in time, any possibility, any impossibility. We get to take on any challenge we want. We're literary time lords. You know?
Yeah, it's cool.
So and we don't have Daleks chasing us around the galaxy either. No.
Not all of us.
But we can invent worse things than Daleks. I mean, give me a break. Exterminate. Give me a break.
That first miniseries that the Daleks are in is pretty terrifying, though. So there's good stuff there, but
yeah, I know. But yeah, after what is it, 50 years of Daleks, you say, don't they ever win a battle every time? It's like, no, I mean, and we hardly ever see them killing anyone anymore. So I was like, the Daleks are not scary anymore. They're funny. So that's the problem, is if you go back to the original Frankenstein movie, that's scary. By the time you get to Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, it's not scary anymore. You can only take the monster out of the castle and terrorize the villagers so many times before the villagers say, oh, the monster's coming in tonight. You know? Get your torch and pitchfork, we'll go chase the monster for a while. All right. I mean, it's not, after a while, Frankenstein isn't scary anymore. He's the Fred Munster.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh, I guess. We try again to bring life into these stories, especially Frankenstein.
Well, what scares people, I mean, fear is probably the most interesting primal emotion. I mean, fear and anger, you can motivate people really well with fear and anger. Those emotions are very, very enrolling. You can get, if one person's angry, it is no problem for him to make the next person angry. Anger is infectious. Fear is a little harder to be infectious, but once you get a group of people afraid, it is a very powerful force. And so figuring out what scares people is the source of horror. What scares me is the not knowing. So any horror story, and I have written a few, is cool. I don't know what it is that's out there, and I don't tell you what it is that's out there. It's just doing terrible things. So I had a story called Chester, where the little girl is attacking the little girl through her dreams, but I don't know what it is. To this day, I can't answer it. I had a story called Night Train to Paris, and the last line is the punchline, and it still doesn't tell you what the threat was. It just, you walk away from that story going, oh my God, I'm not taking that train. So, so it's what is unknown is more scary than what is known, because what is unknown can follow you around forever. The minute you start explaining it, it's not unknown anymore. It's not as scary.
Yeah. You're talking about insights that you've discovered about people with your writing, and I'm wondering if some things that you've written about have changed your life, changed the way you look at things. I mean, I know a lot of research goes into ideas, especially science fiction.
That's a tough question. That's a really good question. Have I written something? Yeah, I would say that. I adopted this little boy in 1992. He was 8 years old, and after a few months, I realized how much I had fallen in love with this little boy. It was no longer, who let this loathsome thing into my house? You know, it's like, whose good idea was this? Because one night I realized I really enjoy having this kid in my life, and so I wrote this little story, which is about nothing except so much as how much I love my kid. It was called The Martian Child. You may have heard of it. Mm-hmm. And thank you. Some people said it's not science fiction, right? But it is. It is about the possibility that we don't know our kids, and that the real human adventure is falling in love with these little people who are in our lives and respecting them and listening to them and being a good place for them. So even though Sean was already in my life, writing that story and putting it out there for me to look at from this little bit of distance shifted my attitude. It's like, all right, I don't care if he's a Martian or a lizard people or a what, he's mine and I love him. And which is the punchline of the story, but actually taking the time to write it out crystallized the thought. And I think that's the most vivid example I can think of. There have been other stories where my heroes or characters have had to come to certain realizations, and by getting it written, it's no longer in my head. I can look at it and say, yeah, I get it. That is so.
have you figured out any general trends that people tend to do, just basic observations about human nature from all your work? Because I feel like writing is essentially about people, no matter what genre you're working in.
I can't say this is true for all writers, because I mean, some writers are very good at studying military tactics and they write military. And some writers are very good at, like Larry is, studying scientific idiosyncrasies and quirks and coming up with Neutron Star and Inconstant Moon, which are two of my favorite stories. But a lot of my work is about looking at what makes people tick. And I know I have a blind spot. I do not write about stupid people. I don't want to spend any time with stupid people, so I don't write. I write about people who are competent and know how to do their jobs, because I find that interesting, because I find that tackling the job is more interesting than, oh my God, I don't know how to handle this. It's like, I will walk out on a Tennessee Williams play. It's like, oh my God, what is wrong with these people? And halfway through Gone with the Wind, or not even halfway, 20 minutes into Gone with the Wind, I want to just slap the stupid out of Scarlett O'Hara.
You too.
Yeah, and
Take a number.
yeah, but actually, Gone with the Wind is a growth story for Scarlett O'Hara. She still doesn't turn into a respectable human being. She's still searching for love. But one of the things that you discover as you work through whatever it is you're working through is you start to become a master of certain insights, not all, but there's certain things that you start to recognize. And I read a lot of, I had a psych major in college. I majored in everything. It was, cool. They finally threw me out of school. They said, you're graduating. I said, no, I'm not done. Yeah, you're done. You're out of here. We don't like you. But there was this thing called transactional analysis, where Eric Burns said people run on rails. They run on scripts. And you can see, once you learn to recognize the pattern of someone's behavior, they're predictable. And then if you're going to have a real relationship with that person, you have to do that thing that breaks the script. Otherwise, you're an enabler. So that's a lot of what my stories are about, is not getting caught up is that the hero has to break his own script in order to win. A story's about a person who has a problem. Well, it's not that the circumstances are the problem, it's that he perceives the circumstances as a problem. And he or she perceives that as a problem because of something internal of, I can't handle this, because of some internal thing that's missing or incomplete that has to be resolved before. Because you notice when at the end of Star Wars, use the Force, asshole. It's, oh yeah, click, turn off the targeting computer. He blows up the Death Star. Everybody goes home. It doesn't take any time at all. All he has to do is learn to use the Force, and the problem disappears. His limitation was his own doubts about himself. And we see that in a lot of stories. Top Gun, same thing, and at the end he's got Goose's dog tags. Talk to me, Goose. Use the Force, asshole. So, which is really a way of saying stop being a jerk and, own it and handle it. So, yeah, that's the insight. You work with enough situations, pretty soon you start to see what your own limitations are too. Oh, fuck, do I have to use the Force again?
Well, that's my opinion of it. Let's get some science in that Force.
Well, yeah, no, but emotionally, I ran into a thing, this goes back, 20 years ago, where I just ran into an incredible bit of bad luck, unexpected, and I was just practically in tears for about 10, 15, 20 minutes, just felt totally helpless. And suddenly I said, wait a minute, I know how to do this. I did all those training courses. I know how to do this. And I got on the phone and handled the situation and by an hour later, I had accomplished more than if I had never run into that brick wall. So yeah, it is, you have to get to that point of saying, wait a minute, I can handle this.
Yeah.
Too often we get stuck, or we stop at, I don't know how to handle this. I can't handle this. And someday, it's when you're in the middle of a forest, the only way out is through the forest.
I saw David Cronenberg this weekend, and someone asked him about writer's block, and basically he said, I don't understand really what writer's block is. There have been plenty of times where I've written things that I hate or am hating, but or things that I love, but it's part of the process of writing. Do you have any thoughts on
Well, I
writer's
always
block?
quote Robert Silverberg, who said, I had a writer's block once. It was the worst 20 minutes of my life. No, I just sit down and there's a story. I'll tell the joke first, and then I'll that the Algonquin Round Table. The subject was writer's blocks, and somebody said, "Well, you go up to your typewriter and you type the." And the human mind cannot stand a vacuum, and so you will finish that sentence, and then you're writing. So Robert Benchley was so thrilled at hearing this, he ran up to his room at the Algonquin, and he came back down to the table an hour or so later. Everybody's still, Dorothy Parker, Bennett Cerf, they're all sitting around, being famous for being famous. And Benchley comes down, he sits down, everybody says, gee, what did he write? Benchley is this great humorist. They all run up to his room, and there's the typewriter, and the piece of paper in the typewriter says, the hell with it. Now, but I have found that if you just start typing, even it is the worst possible sentence, the editor kicks in and says, wait a minute, I can rewrite that sentence. Once you're 3 sentences in, you're writing, and it's just all of a sudden the resistance, whatever the resistance is, the resistance fairy on your shoulder says, I give up, I'm leaving, that little, the shitbird that says you can't do it, I'm lazy, let's not, let's have some chocolates, turn on the TV, read a book, go for a walk, feed the dog. Once you're typing, that little shitbird says, I'm done.
Well, that's good to know. What does a day writing look like for you? What are some of the things that you do? Do you have a schedule? Do you plot things out?
I have this little dog named Jasmine. She's 17 years old. Her bladder wakes up at 7:30 in the morning. I don't wake up at 7:30 in the morning, but her bladder does, and she starts whining. So I have to take the dogs out front because I don't want to wake up Sean, who's usually still asleep. And so we go out front, and everybody pees and poops out front, including me. I'm not awake. I don't care,
That was you.
The dogs come back in, and Jasmine goes into the office where I work, and she curls up in her bed. Charlie, the other dog, he goes back to sleep. And I go back to bed. At some point, the body gets up, makes coffee, feeds the dog, room again. And somewhere in there, it's like, all right, let's check the email, the news, and Facebook to see if what's going on. I don't even have to be conscious for any of that. I get it out of the way. Usually by 9, it's like, okay, I am going to go to work on this one. Usually there's 4 things to work on. Mm-hmm. It's like, which one is the most pressing? And I will sit down and I will, where I left off, and I'll reread, and I'll say, nope, I got to fix that. Once I start fixing something, once I start rewriting, once I'm editing, next thing I know, it's like 1 in the afternoon and I haven't eaten yet. I've probably gone through 2 cups of coffee and some bag of M&Ms. But usually, I have found that my most productive periods are the hours around noon and midnight. And I don't fight that. That midday and midnight will be where I will be most active. Now, it tends to shift around a little bit, but I tracked my hours. I actually put a spreadsheet where I tracked how much work is getting done per hour. And that was what it showed for the longest time. I am good for maybe an hour of television a night. So it'll take me 3 days to get through a movie. So, because I'll get up and go back to work because I will get bored with the average television show by the second commercial, which is usually 5 minutes in. So there's, but mostly if I'm not running errands, then I'm sitting in front of the computer, staring into that giant light bulb trying to fill it with crawly little insect marks. So.
And do you do this on every weekday, every weekend?
Every day,
Wow.
you know what? Writers don't have weekends. I mean, it's like I get up, the dog's
Yeah.
bladder goes off. All right, I'm up. All right. So the computer is there. I can write every day.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't. It's like sometimes you know what? Today I'm going to veg out, or today is a day for just running errands. Like 4 or 5 hours of go to the grocery store, go pick up more supplies for this, run to the storage locker, sort books and DVDs and CDs, and try and get stuff out of the house for a while. Instead, it comes in faster and I can get rid of it. I'll go to Worldcon with a van full of books to sell, and I'm under orders. You must come home with less books than you leave with. God knows when I'll ever read them all.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you. I want to open it up to questions before we still have some time, but I know other people are curious to talk to you. So do we have any questions for David?
Yeah.
Yes, Matthew?
Matthew, yes.
I know you write for research because of something that you've said many times. Do you also read for pleasure? If so,
Yeah.
I figured you probably do. But when do you find time for it, and what kind of things do you read for pleasure?
Well, if I go out for lunch or dinner, I take a book with me. So it'll take me. I used to be able to read a book a day, and do my classes and homework. But now it's like I'm reading over meals. I think part of it is I don't have a good chair in the house for sitting and reading right now. And I have one of those old man beds, which is, layers, and but it doesn't bring me up far enough so it'd be a good reading. And I don't know. What I really want to get is one of those really nice massage chairs, but I know I'll fall asleep. So I'm not reading as much as I used to. But for pleasure, I just finished Irontown Blues, which is another really good John Varley book. I don't think it's his very best, but it's certainly an enjoyable romp. Oh, excuse me. And I'm reading something that I found on my shelf called How to Ditch Your Fairy, which is a young adult book. Takes place in a fictitious country, which might be Australia or someplace. And not everybody, but you have a fairy, a good luck fairy. So the heroine has a parking fairy. I have a parking fairy. I always get good parking places. But she doesn't want the parking fairy anymore. And she wants to get rid of it. And so it's a high school book, but it's beautifully structured and really fun to read. And I end up really caring about the characters. I also have a stack of books I have gotten halfway through and gotten bored with. And once I realized I don't have to finish this, it has been liberating. There's even several TV series I actually stopped watching because it's like they're not going anywhere. So it's very liberating to say I don't have to be compulsive about this. But yeah, I do read for pleasure, and I have a stack of books I intend that I'm going to read. I do want to increase my reading, but I don't want to do it at the expense of my writing.
So yeah, other questions? Eli?
Yeah, it's a bit like the first question, but kind of different. What do you like most in a book? And this may be more over your writing. What do you prefer most?
Well, I like being challenged. I also like coming to something I've never seen before. So Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49 is got a puzzle that never gets solved, which I was really annoyed, but I can't get that book out of my head because it's such a beautiful forensic journey. Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a book you can read maybe 2 pages a day, and then you have to think about what you've read for 3 days. Again, it's a challenge. It exercises the mental muscle. But from time to time, I will go back to one of the books from the Golden Age and reread it. And one of my favorites was What Mad Universe by Frederick Brown. But it's full of coincidence and shortcuts and some sloppy writing. So I actually had to go back and be 12 years old and read it again as a 12-year-old again, just for the fun of take me through this story. Because if it was written today, there's certain things it would be a much longer book, and much more intriguing in what you would have to explore. Some of the Heinlein juveniles have been great. The Citizen of the Galaxy and Have Space with Travel. These are great fun to go back to because Heinlein is making a point that's well worth reading. Early and middle period Heinlein is when he was at his best, and certainly I'm not sure I ever want to read Stranger in a Strange Land again. I'm much too much aware of the flaws in that book, and yet the ambition in it is amazing as well. I like a book that challenges me, a book that says stop and think. But I also like I like a book where the writer's having a lot of fun with language. Terry Pratchett, almost any Terry Pratchett book, you are going to run into sentences that just leave you saying, I have never looked at it that way. For instance, he describes a whorehouse as a house of negotiable virtue. Okay, I'm good with that.
George, you had a question?
Yeah, we were talking about, writing, writing is basically finding your voice.
Yes.
Now, what about cases where a writer is in somebody else's universe? Like, for instance, they're going to write a Sherlock Holmes novel.
Yeah.
Original Sherlock Holmes novel, or cases like that. Do you have any? What are your opinions on?
Well, I actually like that challenge. I like that challenge. I wrote a story called The Case of the Green Carnation, and it was for a Sherlock Holmes anthology. I don't even remember which one. And I did Sherlock Holmes meets Oscar Wilde. So I had to write it in the voice of Dr. Watson, but the dialogue had to be Holmes' voice and Wilde's voice. And so I spent a lot of time researching Oscar Wilde, and the more research I did on Wilde, the more the time frame of the story collapsed to a certain week. It was like the week before he sued the Marquis de Kingsbury. Because it's like, gee, I really want to mention that Holmes has been playing Saint-Saëns' second violin concerto. So when I studied that, it was like, well, that didn't get published until such and such a year. And then finding out that Lord Alfred Douglas and the Marquis de Queensberry, turns out there was an older son who committed suicide, who was possibly having a homosexual affair with a Prime Minister of England, which would explain why the Marquis de Queensberry was so down on Lord Alfred Douglas hanging out with Wilde. And so all of this research piles up and it all collapses the story to a certain... But I had to give Wilde dialogue that you would recognize as Wilde, and then I had to give Holmes dialogue that you would recognize as Holmes. It was a really fun challenge. And so when you have to write in someone else's universe, the challenge there is finding the voice of that story, the voice of that universe. So, and it's not an easy job. There are people who cannot do it because I credit my theater arts training, even though I wasn't very good at acting. I credit the mental exercises. There were two anthologies that Resnick did. One is Women Writing as Men and Men Writing as Women. The women were much better as writing as men because they live in a patriarchal society. So they understood how men think. Most of the male writers could not write as women, not convincingly. I think in the reviews I got pointed out as having succeeded is writing from a female point of view. But which I took as high praise indeed because of the size of the challenge. Most men in a patriarchal culture do not stop to think, how do women think? They don't need to. Whereas women need to be very much aware of how men think because their lives are on the line when they go out of the house, as we are discovering particularly this week. So it's the challenge is finding the voice, and you have to have the chops to do it. So, yeah. I think Charlie had his hand up.
Charlie?
Yes. Is there enough material? Are there enough life lessons? And would you consider, if there are, writing the next step to the Martian Child?
Well,
What has happened since
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's two reasons why I can't or won't. One is I can't invade Sean's privacy. He's entitled to his confidentiality. I had people complaining, well, David didn't write about all the problems that he had with Sean. No, I didn't write about the acting out. I didn't write about the this, and I didn't write about that, and I didn't write about it because Sean has to live with that. And I did not feel I had the people had already violated his life in the foster care system, and he had to do a lot of recovery work. My job was not to exploit his life, but to protect it. And I asked permission from him about the story. And later on, when the movie, when I did the novel version, I said, "Is it okay?" And he said, "Yeah." And he read it. He actually says, "I have only one question." I said, "What's that? How much money are we going to make?" Okay, I raised the kid right. But the second part is that there's not really a great story to tell about his teen years, except the strength it takes not to go out in the backyard and dig a hole 6 feet deep. See, when they're little, look, you fall in love with your kid. You go and you look and they're asleep and they look like little angels and you stand there admiring them. You've got the pillow in both hands. You say, "No, I'll wait another night." By the time they're a teenager, they're too big. They're big enough to fight back. And the problem of disposing the body is a lot more difficult. So, which is about the only story I could tell about his teen years, is why I didn't kill him. And that's a very short story. Is that there might be Zena Henderson did a great story called "Come On Wagon," about a little kid who could make the wagon follow without having to touch it. But later on, when he grew up and somebody was trapped under a tractor, and somebody said, "Remember that thing you did with the wagon? Do it now." And he couldn't do it anymore because he'd grown up. And so I'm not sure there is a sequel to The Martian Child. I've thought about it. Nothing has occurred to me yet. Maybe someday, but at the moment, no. It was a good question, though. Yeah.
Oh, any last questions before we wrap this up? Nick.
Hey,
I
Nick.
know you've done a lot of theatrical work over the years. Has there been something you want to write as a play that you just haven't made work?
I always wanted to prove a point to myself that if you could just put two actors on a bare stage, you could create more drama than you could, because drama is what happens in that space between two people. And I finally got the chance to do this with 5 years ago. I think I wrote a play called "Uncle Daddy Will Not Be Invited," and it's these two guys are planning their wedding, and then one of them's reluctant and finally has to reveal that he does not want to invite his family because he has the family from hell. But in looking at that monologue, I realized, how do I balance it? Who's the other guy in the story? And so it became fine. When I found that, there was this marvelous tension, this balance, and we put it on at CSUN. Maybe a couple people there actually saw it. We got standing ovations at every performance, so it proved my point. I do have a couple other little plays I want to write. One is called Meta, and it's about author trying to convince hero, climb the ladder so I can throw rocks at you. and no, why do you want me to throw rocks? I'm not going to climb the ladder. So I have the first part of it written. I'm not sure how it ends, but it may end with violence when hero comes down the ladder and attacks the author. So I'm not sure how it'll end yet. But yeah, so there are plays I do want to write. Actually getting a play on the boards is a lot harder. At least, a film script, you can send it out and someone will option it and you can put the kid through college or whatever. Ray Bradbury put 4 girls through college on the Martian Child options and Martian Chronicles option alone. So, plays are a lot harder. I mean, it's like I've had people say, "Boy, we could put this play on." I say, "Great, let's do it." So, well, here's the problem. So I would have to be my own producer to get this. I might still do it. Unless somebody wants to invest, I don't know, maybe $50,000, we could do it. So maybe a GoFundMe at some point. but at the moment I have three. I want to get a book called A Nest for Nightmares out of the house. I want to finish a thing called Footnote, which I've only been working on for 45 years. And then Katine and I have to finish Ripple Effect, which is about the mega tsunami that wipes out the Pacific Rim. Bubble and Squeak is a part of that book, and the research on that was a lot of fun. Essentially, what we discovered is after you wipe out the Pacific Rim with a mega tsunami, there is not a lot of resilience, economic resilience, to enable rebuilding, and we're going to find our coasts after 10 years will have been turned into new wildernesses with very small pockets of people. Well, we have to rebuild the harbor and the airport, but a lot of people say, I'm not going to live in an earthquake zone or a tsunami zone again. In the 1994 earthquake, we had people rushing to the airport to leave LA and they never came back. Like, good, bye. So, thank you.
Well, David, we'd love to talk to you all night, but we have to wrap things up for our meeting, so thank you so much for being here. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.